Welcome back, folks, to the fourth episode of Orange Juice. I am your host, Officer Chris Peterson of the Port Orange Police Department. And joining me today, I have Sergeant Mike Reggario, retired from the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Mike, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Like I said, you retired from Orange County after 35 years in law enforcement. Super excited to have you here. I recently took one of your classes, Detecting Deception, where I learned about your handwriting and statement analysis, and that kind of drove me to want to have you on. But before we really get into that, if you could just tell us about yourself, tell us about your career and how you got into law enforcement.
Well, I started my law enforcement career down in South Florida. I started with the Coral Springs Police Department in 1988, probably 1987. Went to the academy in 1988 down in Broward, and worked there for a few years. It was a great department, about 130 person department back then. Really good department. But of course, you look at it like you're brand new in law enforcement. You want to do all these things, and it's not a big department where you have a lot of different units and things like that. So I started looking around. I found the Orange County Sheriff's Office up in Orlando. My brother was up in Orlando. Applied and got the job pretty quickly back then in 1991. So I left Coral Springs PD and came to the Orange County Sheriff's Office in August of 1991 and stayed there until May of 2022.
Very nice. And when you retired, how many personnel did Orange County have?
Orange County has, back then, I think a couple of years back, it was about 1,500 sworn.
Wow.
Probably about 2,200 total. Of course, as you know, we don't cover the jails.
Right.
Orange County does cover the courthouse, but not the jail. So
Okay.
that's just basically it's all just law enforcement, a little bit of corrections.
And then take us through your career at Orange County. Where'd you start? Where'd you end, kind of thing?
Well, like everybody, right? We start on patrol, which is the common denominator, right? We all start on patrol pretty much. And I had a little bit of experience, of course, with Coral Springs, that I did patrol there. So started in patrol with Orange County. Went to a street crimes unit, enjoyed that. And my goal was always, I wanted to be in homicide. And so I always wanted to sort of work towards that. And so I did that for a little while. And to start my detective career, I went into narcotics, because it was more high speed, right?
Yeah.
Than going to property. And nothing against property, but I did narcotics for about 3.5 years. Came out, went to crimes against persons, which investigates all kinds of crimes, battery to attempted murder. And then from there, went into sex crimes. I spent about 1.5 years in sex crimes. Homicide came open, went to homicide, spent 5 years there. Got promoted in place back when they kind of used to do that sort of thing. They don't do that too much in most departments anymore, to corporal as a working detective. And then I went to internal affairs. Spent about 3.5 years in internal, got promoted to sergeant. Then it was back to patrol after about a 20-year break there from patrol. And spent 1 year in patrol. And back into CID as a supervisor of our night investigation squad, which investigates violent crimes in the afternoon. And then I went back into homicide for another 5-year stint as a sergeant. And then spent the last few years of my career on international drive and patrol, and then Disney.
The happiest place on earth, as
the
they
happiest
say.
place on earth.
Can't get any better than that,
Yeah.
right? So, like you said, you wanted to get into homicide, and you knew that that's the route you wanted to take.
Right.
Would you say that was probably your favorite part of the job, was working homicide and being the homicide sergeant for CID?
Yes, it was. It was always a challenge, and homicide kind of the investigation is kind of the top of the mountain, right? Somebody lost their life, and you want to bring justice in those cases, and it's just the most challenging. So I sort of worked towards getting into homicide and making myself the most attractive candidate, right? Bringing as much to the table there as I could. And then when I was a detective there, I really wanted to supervise that unit. And then when I made sergeant, it was just getting back into that squad.
Very nice. And how many homicide detectives did you have under you at the time?
Well, at that time, I had 12 detectives. We had 3 teams of 4 detectives that would work cases as a team, essentially, in the response. So it was 3 teams of 4, and they were over a corporal was over those teams. And then I had another 2 detectives working cold case. So it was 14 detectives, 3 corporals, and then 2 civilians as analysts. So it was probably the largest squad, I'm guessing, probably the largest squad in the agency.
That sounds very large.
It is.
Especially, from a city agency perspective, just to have your homicide department be that large sounds incredible.
And it really was a large squad, but the mentality of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, from my understanding, was they didn't want 2 sergeants in the unit because they didn't want 2 separate voices sort of leading the squad. So that's why I had additional corporals.
Right.
Thankfully, because we couldn't do it without them. I mean, over those 3 teams. Mm-hmm. So they were sort of the quasi sergeant almost of those teams, right?
Yeah.
And then you sort of over them. But that's how it. And to my knowledge, it's still the same way today. They haven't changed that in 2.5 years, and it does work pretty well. A lot of plates in the air, but we had back then roughly 60 UCR homicides a year.
Wow.
So you try to have enough staffing to where 5 is a pretty good number. 5 homicides, UCR homicides per detective. So you can spread out the caseload and the workload.
And UCR, for our citizens that are listening, is it's
Uniform Crime Reports. That is how they are reported to the FBI for statistical purposes. A UCR homicide is either a first-degree murder or a second-degree murder. No other deaths count as a UCR homicide. It has to be first degree or second degree.
And then, it sounds like you've had a very illustrious career, but in that, during your class, you brought up a point of you were speaking with another detective who was kind of giving you info on a case she had, and you said, well, it sounds like she needs a warrant, and could you just walk us through the process of what happened after that?
Well, I made a comment at the time. I was a detective, and I had just left sex crimes not long before that, and I made the comment to my sergeant in frustration about how we train, or what training are we providing new detectives that come into CID. There's a lack of training, especially back then. And it's basically a sink or swim when you go into investigations. And honestly, it is still that way to a great extent. It's sink or swim. There is no formal training. It's not like you ride along with another detective. You're on your own. You have your own caseload. And in many squads, most cases, you work on your own. Robbery, sex crimes, of course, property crimes. You're working these cases on your own. In homicide, it's kind of unique because you work with another partner on a homicide, but other death investigations, again, you're still on your own in other death investigations. But certainly when you start in CID, you have a high caseload, and you don't know necessarily how to write an arrest warrant, how to write a search warrant, crime scene management, all of these sort of basic, what I call foundational type skills that nobody tells you about, because it's different than patrol. It's very different than being on patrol.
Right.
And so he said, well, you should come up with some training, right? I hadn't thought that far ahead when I made the comment. And so I really honestly, I had no training background. I'd never done training before. So I really honestly, I didn't do anything until he asked me about it a month later. And then I tried to find classes, and there was just no classes like that we could send people to. So I came up with training, and that was my initial thrust into training. I was sort of thrust upon me. It wasn't something I was seeking out. And but I'm very competitive, and when I do something, I want to do it well. I don't want to just go through the motions of doing it. If you're going to do it well, or try to at least do it as best you can. And so I tried to put out the best class that I could, and it got a very good response. And the class grew from 16 hours in-house as Orange County, and we would invite, like, we had OPD people in the class before you knew it, and I was doing it like twice a year. And we brought it to Valencia as a 40-hour class because it was quickly expanding as I was getting more and more topics.
As you realized more things needed to be taught to new detectives.
Correct. Interview and interrogation and scene management and case law and forensics, right? We would also take a field trip to FDLE's crime lab because it's the great mystery, right? Nobody knows what happens there, why it happens.
I send them something and I get back a cool piece of paper saying this or that.
Yeah, months later, right? And there's actually people there.
There's real humans doing things.
There's real humans there. So it grew into that. So there was a field trip to FDLE crime lab, and again, particularly as a new detective, you don't know how all of these things work and can assist you in doing the job.
Right.
You're not on your own, like a lot of new detectives feel. Like you're on your own.
Yeah, and I think in my time on patrol, you go through your FTO phases, right? Your 3 phases. For us, it's a month each phase, with a 2-week in-house and then a 2-week what they call ghost period, where you're quasi on your own, right? But then after that, you kind of have to find your way, right? You can ask your shift mates to help you on certain things and help you with this and that, but I'm sure CID is somewhat similar. Like, you can ask another detective, but you're kind of expected to know what you're doing when you get that job. So I think the implementation of training specifically for that is super important. And you have created that class. That class is now offered at multiple training facilities, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, I created it. It's over 20 years ago, and now I see that there's classes like that. And Daytona, in fact, was doing a detectives academy, which was very, very similar to what I was doing in what I call the Intro to CID class at Valencia. And again, just basic interview and interrogation skills, case management skills, which for new detectives can be daunting.
Yeah.
They think they want to solve every case, and you can't.
Exactly.
You don't have the time to put into all the cases. So you have to be able to manage your caseload. Because particularly as a new detective, you're getting 20, 30 cases maybe assigned a month.
Right.
And you got to close them. Or before you know it, you're going to have 100 cases assigned.
Exactly, yeah. Now, through coming up with that class and through teaching that, you have since opened a business, the Police Training Institute, where you teach more than just Intro to CID, or you have instructors who teach more than just Intro to CID. Could you walk us through kind of what classes you now teach and what's now being offered and stuff like that?
Through Intro to CID, there was handwriting. I was teaching handwriting analysis or graphology and statement analysis. Again, very short blocks, like an hour in that class, part of that class. And interview and interrogation was also a part of the class, right? Well, I was asked to be the lead instructor for interview and interrogation at Valencia when their instructor left that was teaching interview and interrogation. So after some thought, I agreed to do that. So now I was teaching interview and interrogation as well. And body language was a small part of interview and interrogation. So as I'm now teaching these various topics, I would get the evals back from students that wanted more of those particular segments in those classes: body language in I&I, handwriting and statement analysis in the Intro to CID class. So I couldn't expand them without taking something out of those classes that I didn't want to take out. So I wound up breaking those topics off and creating another class. I called it Detecting Deception, which had those 3 skills, separate but related: graphology, body language, statement analysis, and I started teaching that. Daytona, Robin Davis, I don't know if you're familiar with Robin, but sure. Robin used to be the advanced training coordinator.
Okay.
She does what Sarah is doing now
right.
At Daytona. And she had heard, I never did ask her how she heard about my class, but she heard about my interview and interrogation class that we were doing. in Orlando, in Valencia. She asked me if I would teach in Daytona. So I said, sure, I can take the show on the road. It's not that far up the road.
Right.
So that's when I started teaching interview and interrogation in Daytona. And Robin was after me then to start teaching death investigations, because nobody was really teaching death investigations as a 40-hour state curriculum class. And the folks that were getting up there in age. And honestly, they'd been teaching it for a long time. They didn't want to do it anymore. They wanted to retire.
They were ready to call it a day.
I knew who she was talking about, because they taught me death investigations way back.
Yeah.
And so she was right. Nobody was teaching it in Orlando either. So after some prodding by Robin, I finally said, okay, I'll do it. So, because the work in teaching a class like that is really before you ever walk into the classroom. The work is getting the curriculum and getting it to where it makes sense and it flows, and how you're going to teach these subjects and these topics. And so, and I'm a little bit OCD. I'm a little obsessive compulsive. So It's a lot of work before you get into the classroom. So I finally decided, okay, I'll do it. And that was really when I left homicide. That's when I said, okay, because I was just too busy when I was leading homicide as a sergeant to tackle that. So when I left homicide is when I said, okay, I'll teach death investigations. And that's what I did. So now I'm teaching interview and interrogation, death investigations, and detecting deception. Once in a while, maybe once a year, I'll teach intro to CID, either in Orlando or in Daytona. Because intro to CID is more of it's a buffet. Right? It's a buffet. It's a whole bunch of topics. I teach some of them, but I'm not an expert in all those topics. In fact, I'm an expert in very few of those topics. So I get experts in those topics to come in and talk about them.
Exactly.
The folks that I know are really, they're really good at what they do, and they don't mind coming in and talking about it, and teaching the class what they do, and how they do it, and how they can help them. So we have electronic surveillance and forensics and interview and interrogation and all of these topics now. So really in that class, I'm more of a ringmaster. I'm a ringleader, right? I kind of keep it flowing. I coordinate with the instructors, get it done. The other classes, I teach the bulk of those classes, if not all of them.
And I think it's important that people who are experts or, know the majority of the info in that, I think it's important that they want to teach.
Yes.
And want to help the next generation. So it's great that you know people that are experts in those fields and that can teach. Going back to detecting deception, that's a class I just took with you.
Yes.
And I guess I just want to know, how'd you get interested in handwriting analysis and statement analysis and body language? What drove you to be like, this is kind of cool, I want to learn more about this?
Well, I was in homicide as a detective my first go round, and we get a lot of statements. In Orange County, the sheriff's office, they collect statements from everybody, victims, witnesses, suspects. And so I would get 20 statements across my desk on a week. And I had heard about handwriting, and I didn't know much about it. I just heard about it, and I said, well, maybe there's more I can get out of these statements than what I'm getting.
Right.
So I said, well, I'm going to look into it. And I was a skeptic, but I said, no, let me see if there's anything to it. So I did. I got a book, and I got another book, and I started reading about it, and I'm like, And then I started practicing it with friends and family, asking for handwriting samples. Let's see if this stuff actually works, right? And then the more I did that, I'm like, wow, there's really something to this. It's people's handwriting really is different. It really does have, because we call it handwriting, but as I say in class, it's really brain writing.
Correct.
It's your brain and your personality. It's your hand isn't disconnected from your mind. They're very connected. So it's people's personality that actually comes out in their handwriting and through their handwriting. And so then I started becoming more and more convinced, and then I brought it into the intro to CID class as a short block. I'm like, hey, this stuff is out there because they're looking at statements too.
Right.
Right. And so not only personality aspects or you can observe in handwriting, but also signs of an aggressive type of personality and even signs of deception. in the writing that we look at in criminal investigations and statements that people provide. So that's a pretty valuable insight in our line of work. Now, is that effective in every single case? No, but maybe in 5 out of 100. Well, that's still 5% of your cases.
Exactly.
That's pretty nice.
And to kind of piggyback off that, detectives are looking at those statements when they get that case, but normally it's patrol that's going out and originally collecting those statements. So I think the fact that it's offered to everyone, me being in patrol, being able to kind of weed through it first, it's like take a look at it, see what's going on, and maybe start the questioning and kind of dig a little deeper. Or as you said in class, where do I dig my shovel?
Where do you put your shovel? Right.
And I think you can kind of start to get at people, see if they're telling you the truth. And that might help you make that call to the detectives and be like, hey, I think this is more than just X, Y, Z. I think we need to maybe look into this more.
Right.
And I mean, it's a good class. I think anyone that can take it should take it.
And that's the thing. It's not a niche class. If you're in law enforcement, you're doing investigations.
Exactly.
I don't care whether you're in uniform or you're in a coat and tie. You're doing investigations, right? We're asking questions. You're not just a report taker. You're an investigator.
Right.
And so there's value in these skills, whether you're in patrol or you're in auto theft or you're in property or you're in homicide. It's not a niche class. And so many classes in law enforcement, and I don't know if I should be even saying this, but, it's a niche class. You go to a sex crimes class, well, you can only use it on a sex crimes call pretty much, right? I mean, report writing is universal. It's general.
Right.
But most of the training is just for a specific type of case that you may be working. The beauty of that detecting deception class is whether you're in patrol or you're a conventional detective, you can utilize these skills. And honestly, even in the private sector, which I do teach some in the private sector, not
right.
Most of my students are law enforcement, but all kinds of investigators. Private investigators. I actually taught at Disney investigators.
Yeah.
These skills because they're doing internal investigations as well as even some criminal allegations, right? Hotel investigators, they're all doing these investigations.
Right.
And so therefore these skills can be valuable for them as well.
And I think every industry, right? Body language plays a part, whether you're a car salesman or you're an investigator or you're a real estate agent. It helps to be able to read the person you're talking to, right? Especially if you're trying to make that sale or you're trying to catch that person in a lie in that internal audit, right? So, like you said, this class is good for everyone, whether you're a law enforcement or you work in the private sector. It's just a useful tool to have in your tool belt that you can later utilize to help you in your day-to-day job.
Absolutely. With a school administrator, they're doing investigations in the schools, right?
Exactly.
But even if you're not doing investigations, so many people are interested in, everything is a reality show nowadays.
Exactly.
Everything's a reality show, from The Mole to 48 Hours to Dateline to The First 48, and all of these shows that are out there are showing, are reality shows. They're not actors; they're just people put in these situations, and so there's a lot of interest from even just homemakers, from just people that are that just have an interest in watching this stuff and following cases, the true crime genre, right?
Right.
So I read a lot of books on these topics, a lot of books on body language and particularly body language and statement analysis. And I would read the books and it's like sometimes I would put the book down. I'm like, the more I knew about it, it's like they kind of made it, I felt like it was maybe a little bit complicated for people to digest. So after talking to my wife, and my wife was always prodding me, you should write a book. And at this point, I was already teaching the class.
Right.
So detecting deception. And so I said, okay, I think I'm going to write a book. And people have asked me, well, how hard is it to write a book? And for me, it wasn't a hard process because I literally wrote the book like I teach the class.
And your first line in the book is, they say everyone has one book in them.
Right. You're right. You actually read it. Right. There is. That's what they say. Everybody's got a book in them, right? Maybe this is mine. And so I just wrote the book like I was teaching the class. I'm like, okay, here's what I'm going to do now. And so it just really flowed, because I've taught the class so many times that it just flowed out. Now in the book, I don't cover graphology. It's just on body language and statement analysis. So I took those two topics. And I tried, and even in my class, of course, as you know, hopefully, because you just went to the class, I try to keep it simple, and I try to give you something that you can use, things that you can use, and use them right away. Now, there's more to it, because, right, Sports Center, right, we'll look at the highlights.
Exactly.
There's more to it. Hopefully, I'm building a foundation, providing you a foundation that you can continue to build on through your career, and practice these skills. But I'm going to give you enough that even if this is all you get, you'll be okay. You're going to be pretty well off. And for those that are not in law enforcement, civilians that just are interested in this, hopefully I've made it easy to understand,
right,
where you can actually use it, as opposed to putting people in 16 different categories of personality, right? And nobody does that. Honestly, I've been studying body language for 20 years. I don't do that.
That's where you start getting into the weeds of it. The basics, to me, seem like enough to get you to where you need to be in that investigation.
Right.
I'm not a psychologist. My job is not to read people all the time. My job is to not make sure that people are fit for duty like the psychologists do when we all get hired.
Sure.
But my job is to be able to tell if someone is being deceitful with me. And I think your class and your book kind of help give you those guidelines to get you to that point.
Right. And that's what I try to do. The book is really, because there's all kinds of body language books out there, for negotiations, for dating. Well, my book is really for interacting with people. And I'm not talking about, necessarily a conventional interrogation type setting, although that you could certainly, that would be one, but just in a conversational type setting, how you can interact with people and determine whether or not there's those signs of anxiety.
Exactly. And then, so your book, Uncover the Truth, what kind of drove you to be like, I'm going to write this? Because you said, your wife said, you should write a book, but what was that deciding factor of, what, I'm going to do it, I'm going to sit down, put in the hours to do it?
Well, I love those books, and I love reading, and I'm like, well, maybe I do have something to offer in these topics, in this genre. Maybe I do have something to offer that people would find, interesting and useful. And so I said, okay, so I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna give it a shot. And then, so I did. When I was getting ready to retire, I started the book. I finished it. I contracted with a professional agency to go ahead and edit the book and help me with the book cover and all of that process, and getting it on Amazon, right? Because you got to be on Amazon.
If you're not on Amazon, you're not doing it right.
On Amazon. So that process was interesting, and I didn't know anything about it, but it was very interesting to go through. And coincidentally, I was recently signed by a publisher. I sent you sent it like an excerpt of your manuscript, and so a publisher from the true crime genre, Genius Publishing, has picked me up, and there's going to be a second edition now of this book coming out. We're slated for April.
Very nice.
Hopefully we make April. And so there'll be a second edition of Uncover the Truth coming out through Genius Publishing, which is going to include, of course, some of the things like the Rob O'Neill case that I talk about in class.
Yes.
The Sarah Boone case that I talk about in class. So there's going to be some cases that have happened since I wrote the book that I've now included in the second edition of Uncover the Truth. And I wrote a second book as well called, I've titled it The Immaculate Confession.
Very nice.
And it's on interview and interrogation skills.
Okay.
Because these are not interview and interrogation skills, as you know, and we talk about in class. You use these skills to know where to put your shovel. And by that, we mean where to continue the investigation, where to focus your questioning, your investigation, because now you're on a different level. Because now you have a pretty good idea where you should be focusing your questioning and your investigation. And it's those solid police investigative skills, interview skills, that help you to go ahead and solve or close the case.
Okay. And Is the Immaculate Confession out yet? Can it be purchased? Or
no, it's not out yet. But Genius has picked up both books.
Okay.
So
nice. Congratulations.
after this one comes out, we'll be working on that one. The game plan, I think, is to get that book out in late this year, like October.
So you've been busy in retirement.
Well, it's busy. I say busy. It's a lot of it is just it's fun to do. Come in here to do this, right? I don't consider this, and quite honestly, when I'm teaching the class, I'm having a ball. I have a lot of fun with it because I really think that the skills are not just they're interesting, they're fun, and they're useful for what we do as cops.
Exactly.
So I always tell that my wife thinks I'm working when I'm teaching these classes, but I use that word pretty loosely. She thinks I'm working, but I'm having a ball. I have a lot of fun doing it.
You're sharing knowledge and having fun. And that's the important part. It's, it's important to do a job that you enjoy, do a job that you have fun in.
Right.
And for me, that's law enforcement. I love interacting with people. I love not sitting behind a desk and being able to go out and drive my car for 12 days. Every day is different. And so I think it's super important that you have found that thing that even in retirement, you're still having fun. So to go back to the book and the skills that you cover in the book, is there a case that you can talk about from your time with Orange County where these skills kind of were that turning point for you? You were able to dig your shovel in the right place based on something you saw.
Well, I think, and I talk about it in the book and in the class, it would probably be the Casey Anthony case because that was such a high-profile case. I was in internal, what we call professional standards, in Orange County, and I caught that case from the internal, not the criminal case, but the internal case. That was an allegation, basically, of how the Orange County Sheriff's Office, mainly patrol, responded to some calls for service that were made by a guy by the name of Roy Kronk, who discovered the remains. And when I reviewed his statements, of course, having the knowledge that I've gained through doing this, it was pretty obvious to me that he wasn't being completely honest. And I think when that happens, and it's really kind of that linchpin sort of, wow, really? I mean, there it was. I mean, it's there, but people didn't necessarily know how to interpret it.
Right.
But when you know these skills, you know how to interpret it. And I'm like, well, I think he's being dishonest. And, I'm the only one on that side of the fence, so to speak. Right. But I have such confidence in these skills and how effective they are that I didn't have any problem being that guy on the other side, the only guy on the outside of the fence, which can be pretty daunting.
Right.
At times, as you know, especially in law enforcement. But it turns out that was correct, and he wasn't being. And then, the case sort of went on, and they uncovered the truth, right, in their criminal investigation. But I think that's what we're supposed to do. That's what our job is, right, and that's why I called it "Uncover the Truth," the book, because that is what we're supposed to be doing.
And you talk about people being truthfully dishonest,
yes,
and how they're not lying to you in their statements, but they're not telling you the truth either.
Right.
And would you say that in that moment, in that investigation, that's what was happening, is he wasn't lying,
yes,
but he also wasn't being 100% truthful in what he should have been saying to the deputies that responded.
Correct. It's what I call truthfully deceptive. And the misconception is even in law enforcement is we tend to think that everybody's lying to us, right? Everybody's lying and people are lying. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It does occasionally, certainly. But a lot of what we deal with is people being truthfully deceptive,
right?
Which means they just omit information. And I always say the beauty of these skills is you can even determine when somebody's omitting information out of their story, like what we talk about with when we look at the case from Jacksonville that was profiled in the Murder on a Sunday Morning clip that I show. Because we talk about so many cases, right? And a lot of them had national attention, not all of them, but a lot of them did. And apply these skills to them in a variety of ways, whether it's somebody that's verbally giving testimony or a 911 call or a written statement, right? communication in all its forms, and utilizing these skills to examine and evaluate those statements, that information.
Right. And I think, like you said, it's not what they say, it's what they're failing to say or how they say it, right?
Correct.
And in your time, now that you've retired, do you still find yourself, you'll be watching TV and you'll see something and you'll be like, there it is?
I do. Yes, I do it. Unfortunately, you can't turn it off. I mean, so now when I'm talking with my friends, I don't go, "Oh, gotcha," I don't do that. I don't have that many friends to begin with. I don't want to lose the ones I've got. But yes, when we're watching a Dateline episode or a 48 Hours mystery or the news, as I point out in my class when talking about the Madeline Soto case, and they say, "Oh, we're going to talk to the parents," and I watch that interview, I'm going, "Oh, they're involved." So I grab my wife and I go, "Hey, they're involved." She's like, "Well, okay, that's great, Mike. You're not a cop anymore."
She's cooking dinner. She's like, "All right, cool, yeah, I'm good."
I go, "Do you see it? Do you see it?" So yeah, I mean, I sit there and I look at the TV and I go, "Wow, there it is." In some cases, you're not sure that the law enforcement officers actually have recognized that.
Right.
And in some cases, you are. Like this one is like great because 2 days later or 3 days later, they arrested Stephen Stearns for the murder of Madeline Soto. And from everything I've seen, Osceola County did a really good job on the case. And but yes, you watch that interview with the I say the parents, but it was the mother, and Stephen was the stepfather, I guess. I don't know that they were actually married, but you see the signs of deception right there. You see it all the time.
Right. And in those skills that you've picked up, do you find that people tell you more in what they write or what their body tells you when you're speaking with them?
Well, listen, I always say the more you get, more information you can gather, and you have the opportunity to evaluate, the more certain you can be, right?
Right.
Yeah, there's obviously, as a detective, we kind of deal with the statement initially, and then we deal with the actual person that wrote the statement.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm going to see, well, does their body language confirm the statement that I saw, that I read? And then I'm even more certain. I always say the more red flags that I drop, the more certain I am of deception. And of course, there's not just flags that go towards deception. There's flags that go towards truthfulness. Not everybody's lying to us, right? And I point that out in the class, that we should also pay attention to those truthful behaviors, right? Everybody is lying to us.
Exactly. And like you said, it's something that you can't control. You subconsciously, you're doing these things, and it's important that law enforcement has the skills to pick up on those body movements, or to pick up on that handwriting, how it suddenly changes or is starting to show something different.
Right.
And do you think in your time at Orange County and the classes you've taught, do you think those skills have been put to good use with not only yourself, but other officers?
As you know, and you've been an officer for quite a long time. I was an officer for a long time. We don't get training like this, like I provide out there. It's not interview and interrogation training. This is different. And I think it's important. I think it's important for officers to be aware of these skills, to know these skills, and they don't get training on them. I teach all over the country now. I'm in Columbus, Ohio next week, and then I'm going to be in Virginia, and then I'm going to New Jersey, and I teach officers all over the country. And whether it's a 3-year officer or a 23-year officer, they're not aware of these skills. So go back to the old saying, right? I'm going to give you something new for your tool belt that is actually going to be useful. And again, whether you're on patrol or you're investigating homicides and anything in between, you will be able to use these skills, and they will work for you. They're going to be effective. Why? Because we're talking about human nature. So as long as we're dealing with people, these skills are going to be effective.
Right. And I think the important thing to remember is, as you pointed out in class, it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose. You're going to give us the information we need, and it's going to be a lot in a short period of time. And it's great to get that information, but if you don't practice that information, or if you don't build on that foundation, you're going to lose it.
Absolutely. And I can't tell you the number of students. And listen, I didn't start learning these skills until I was in homicide. I was a cop for already about 15 years.
Yeah.
And I missed a lot of stuff. And I just wanted to learn these skills, not to teach them. I wanted to make myself better. Right. I wanted to make myself better because I wanted to be the best.
Exactly.
And it's that competitive nature. And so it's just about working hard to become the best and become as good as you can be. And so that's why I started learning the skills. And then I was like, hey, not just me, but these skills will be pretty useful for that detective and this detective. So why just keep them to myself?
Yeah.
So why not try to make them a little bit better? And I always say, and I didn't say it in this class, but something, if I can make you 1% better and I train 1,000 deputies or officers this year, I made 1,000 people 1% better. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I'll take that because I'm not working cases anymore. I retired 2.5 years ago. Can I share something with you guys?
Of course.
I got a text after the class just a day or two ago, and it's good afternoon. This is from one of the guys in our class, Hudson, from Brevard County Sheriff's Office. I was in your detecting deception class earlier this week. I just want to let you know I used some of the skills I learned this week on a burglary case I had yesterday. Although I wasn't able to get a full confession, the signs of deception were there. But my biggest thing was I was able to analyze the recording of his statement and was able to recover the stolen items in a wooded lot nearby. I just wanted to let you know I don't think I would have paid too much attention to the statement before taking your class. Thank you very much for the knowledge, and I hope to catch one of your classes. That's success. I made Hudson 1% better.
And that you have to feel good about that.
That is success for an instructor. That's success. I'm not coming there to just hear myself talk. I know these skills. I want to provide them for you guys because I know they're going to make you guys better at what you do, right? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's success. It doesn't have to be a homicide. It can be a burglary investigation at your work. It's a sex crime that you work. It's a traffic stop. It's a traffic homicide case. Whatever it is, you can utilize these skills, and it may key you to something that keys you to uncover the truth.
Exactly. Mike, I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to thank you for continuing to educate, future law enforcement officers. Your book, Uncover the Truth, the first edition, can be found on Amazon currently.
Yes.
With the second edition and your other book, The Immaculate Confession, coming down the pipeline soon.
Yes.
Again, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Chris.
Sir.